Welcome of how much trust is still possible in IT security and how we can effectively and efficiently protect modern distributed IT environments with all their mobile and cloud components. Would like to discuss these questions are Richard Mears and Andy Cradle. They're both security specialists and they both work for the network and security firm Akamai. Good morning, Richard and Andy.
Good morning.
Before we start the presentation, before we enter the discussion, we would like to ask you a question because we want to know what are currently your main security concerns. Please tell us. We would like to know and to discuss this and to address this in our further presentation. Richard, concerning security concerns, do you see industry-specific differences in the main concerns that companies have today?
Absolutely. There are some specific verticals that will experience, for example, credential stuffing attacks, where I think there's been a lot of recent discussion around sort of Netflix and Hulu because they get it's very nice for people to try and get free accounts from those so they can get free movies. But people are also leveraging this and trying this on with financial institutions as well to see if they can gain access to the accounts. So there's a huge focus at the moment on credential stuffing within financial services and e-commerce. But obviously things like phishing is prevalent across all verticals. Gaining access to assets and crown jewels of data is useful in virtually every single organization. So it doesn't really matter if you haven't got a huge web presence. Phishing is always going to be an important concern.
Mm-hmm. And there, of course, these concerns we list in our poll. They act together. There is spear phishing is a typical tool to get data, to get sensitive information from the companies, for example.
Absolutely, and there are many examples of organizations that have been successfully spear phished or just generically phished. The social engineering aspects now are incredibly clever, and there's lots of examples of this where people are posing as secretaries or part of the executive team, asking people within the organization to wire transfer money to certain organizations, and this is part of a merger and acquisition, so we have to keep it very quiet. Please send $100,000 over to this organization. This is increasingly common now, and by doing very simple social engineering, understanding the hierarchy within an organization, and being able to spoof email addresses and that sort of thing, create these very common scenarios.
Let's look at the results of the quick poll. We see data breaches and phishing and social engineering, as we discussed in the moment. They work together, obviously, and they are the main concerns at the moment. Certainly, the general data protection rule does play a role as well, because it affects the way you have to report data breaches, and there are heavy fines if you do not protect your data good enough.
Yeah, I think phishing and data breaches obviously go hand in hand. Because, and as we've sort of seen in the talk today, there are many examples of how this has happened, and the data breaches. There's a report by Ponemon a couple of years ago that sort of discussed the amount of time that hackers can be inside a network before they were detected, and I think in EMEA it was over 200 days. That hackers have been inside a network, not necessarily continually exfiltrating data, but they had been inside the network for over 200 days. And I think this sort of shows the extent of the problem.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we will talk about today, because once inside the network, the traffic is trusted in I would say in the old paradigm of IT security, and that's exactly what we will talk about today. And I will let you show your presentation now.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Mears, and I work in the security strategy team here at Akamai. Joining me is Andy Crail, who heads up our pre-sales team here in EMEA. So today we're going to be talking about Zero Trust, what it is, the drivers behind it, and how Akamai has successfully deployed it. So first, a couple of words on Akamai. Through our global edge, we have been delivering and protecting the internet for over 20 years, working with some of the biggest brands in the world to ensure that traffic is delivered quickly, users are protected, and corporate data stays safe. Sorry, just having a slight problem with my deck. Hold on one second. So a little bit of extra icons on the screen, but apologies for that. But let's proceed with the presentation. So, as we were talking, Akamai has been protecting the internet for the last 20 years, and what we want to talk about now is really sort of look at change, or really importantly, the speed of change. 30 years ago, Tim Berners-Lee was working on a small side project at CERN. Working on a Next computer, he created the world's first web page and realistically changed the way we use and share information forever. When he presented it to his boss, the response was vague but exciting. And if we look back now, I don't think anybody at the time could have predicted the exponential and all-encompassing growth of the World Wide Web. 12 years ago, Steve Jobs announced the iPhone at Macworld and revolutionized mobile information utilization. Before Tim, if you wanted to find data, you went to the Yellow Pages, you spoke to the subject matter expert, you read the manual, the actual physical manual. Before Steve, mobile phones were just that, telephones that were mobile, with a few clunky apps. Now we can work for days without a computer or a laptop from wherever we are in the world. As we move forward, the speed of change is going to be incremental and is going to have a profound effect on your business. So this is the typical historical legacy view of our networks and how our users access their data. With our users and applications all on the same network, all protected within the same perimeter. But realistically, how many organizations today still have this in their entirety? We have remote apps, we have internet sites, we have infrastructure as a service that are outside the corporate network. And the users are also outside the central protected environment. Access to these services via traditional methods either requires hairpinning or tromboning, whatever you want to call it, and taking all the traffic back to HQ, pushing it through the security steps and then back out to the apps. This is massively complex and slow. Or we could go direct to these external apps, but then where is the security? So this is where we have the classic castle and moat scenario. At this point, it is understood that the enterprise security perimeter model doesn't fit in today's world. And the analysts have caught on with this, whether it's Forrest with the Zero Trust moniker, or Gartner with CARTA, which is an acronym for Continuous Adaptive Risk and Trust Assessment. Essentially, they both talk about the same concept, this idea of removing the element of trust within the network. So this is an excerpt from a Forrester analyst report. As businesses monetize information and insights across a complex business ecosystem, the idea of a corporate perimeter becomes quaint, even dangerous. Now, I know this is a bit of a mouthful, so I thought I would draw your attention to this very English word, quaint. So this means odd, peculiar, or inappropriate. So in other words, if we were designing these networks from scratch today, without legacy and historical influences, we wouldn't build a single hard perimeter. So this is how we see the traditional trust model. Anything that is in the inner sanctum on the far right is trusted. And we pack our perimeter to the left with firewalls and multi-layer security to protect that perimeter. That means that this internal user has full network access to all of the internal resources and services. Even if they were using a VPN, it doesn't matter where in the world they are, this is their effective position. Even if they remain within the physical perimeter, they can still get phished and invite malware into the business and data to get exploited. The zero trust model means that users in the internal network, by whatever means, are not trusted. Access to any resource or service requires verification against credentials and authorization.
We have a
Thomas,
quick
would
poll.
you like to?
Yeah. We have a quick poll concerning the perimeter discussion. We would like to know from you whether you think the perimeter has become indefensible, or do you disagree with this statement? Another information for you, you can also ask questions to us. You find an input field in the webinar console for that. We will collect these questions and we will answer them in the Q&A session that we plan at the end of the webinar. Richard, you said, or the analysts say, the perimeter, the idea of a defensible perimeter has become dangerous or quaint. Are the tools to defend the perimeter, like firewalls or DMZs, have become obsolete then, or do you say they are still valid as a first line of defense?
I think that there is still a case for using firewalls. There is still a case for using the traditional IPS and RDS. It depends on the infrastructure that you want to protect. And there are still going to be legacy applications and legacy infrastructure that requires a physical perimeter. But realistically, what we're talking about into today's environment, where we have our users in a coffee shop or in an office or in a perimeter office or in a airport lounge or working from home, this sort of centralized working environment that we have, and with our data being decentralized. So realistically, nobody sits in the same location as their data anymore. And this hasn't happened for a number of years now. So the concept of having user and data in the same location and sticking a big hard wall around it doesn't really work anymore, because the users and data are never in the same place. So what we need to do is we need to ensure that there is going to be an effective way for the users to access the applications
so
without introducing additional risk into the network.
So we need at least additional lines of defenses to complete the protection against intruders and attacks. Let's look at the results of the poll. Most of our audience agrees or strongly agrees with this statement. Only 16% disagree. And I know you have another survey that exactly or asked a similar question.
Yeah, so we did a similar. This is a survey that was done by Forrester, and so I think your poll results were 10% higher than what was came back from Forrester, which and to the question, the network perimeter is indefensible in today's technology ecosystem of distributed cloud networks and mobile and remote users. There was a 58 response, but this was July last year, and I think that in the 9 months since then, there's been a lot of thought, leadership, and a lot of understanding about how this how the traditional perimeter network has become not really a tangible solution to the modern issues that we have with mobile workforces.
So you think
we also had a
sorry, you think the result of our poll is not only because our audience is aware of this, but it's a general trend that it becomes more and more obvious that the perimeter is indefensible.
Absolutely. I think that as more and more tools come into the market to enable organizations to provide secure access for their end users that is more efficient than using the legacy methods, that they're able to protect their users, they're able to protect their data, they're able to provide their users with an effective mobile solution that doesn't hamper them. And historically, mobile solutions have never been as ease of use, and has never been as nice to use as being sitting in the corporate office where you had access to everything. When you become mobile, when the data moves out of the organization, it may be on the other side of the planet, it means that you end up with a lot of potential clunky networking to put everything together. And as more tools come into the market that allow us to be able to work seamlessly with all these applications, no matter where you are, I think this makes a very good position to be able to move away from the traditional castle and moat scenario.
Yeah, and the more complicated it is to access the company network securely, the more the employees are tempted to overrule these security mechanisms and to bring another layer of insecurity in it.
Exactly, and the security department has always been seen as the department of no, and I think that zero trust, when delivered effectively, is a really good way of getting around that often negative connotation associated with security, because everybody thinks, well, security just means you can't do something, or you're not going to be able to do it in the way you want to do it, which is why we have all the shadow IT. When you deploy zero trust in an effective way, it can actually make the access faster. It can take away a lot of the bane of IT departments, and we'll go through a few other things that we as we go through the presentation that sort of shows this is actually better for end users. End users like this a lot more. It's easier, it's faster, it's quicker, and all the applications behave like SaaS applications. So there's lots of benefits for the end users. And this always helps with any change, because where the end users want it because it's better, that makes change so much easier. And at the end of it, you end up with a more secure environment and happier users, which is a win-win for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I want to talk about so we've been talking about we need to be looking at alternatives to the traditional castle and moat. So here are a few examples of companies who are on their zero trust journey, and what were the drivers for those organizations to look at zero trust. Now, I'd apologize for the dramatic picture in the bottom left. This is actually part of a video produced by Netflix discussing their adoption of zero trust. So Netflix did a review of their network topology, and they found that their office network, so the users' desktops, laptops, printers, etc., was a liability. So what did they mean by this? It didn't mean that the actual network was faulty or prone to failure. What they meant was that by design, it was inherently insecure. As all of Netflix's offices were linked together to allow access to core applications and to enable effective communication and sharing of data, they observed that theoretically a compromised machine in one office could allow an attacker to move laterally through the office network, through internal routing, and hit core apps in another geo, wherever they may be. So they obviously took care with endpoint protection and all the standard security tools, but you can never ensure that every device that is plugged into the network is 100% safe, or even company owned. You know, if you think of maintenance engineers for air conditioning, or looking after the lifts or something like that, or interns or contractors, you can never be sure that if they're putting something into the network to try and do monitoring, that those machines are going to be complete within your control. And therefore, with all of these third-party people coming in, your security, as they put it, was as good as the company's ability to prevent tailgating into the building. Therefore, now, when you plug your device into a Netflix network, you can only access the internet, nothing else by default. So you can't access any internal applications. If you do a scan of the internal network, you're not going to get anything apart from the external router going out to the internet.
And no matter where you, Britain, it doesn't depend whether you're in an office or you're at home or in a cafe. It's always zero trust for the first contact.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you walk into a Netflix office, you know, if you manage to get in there as they talk, if you tailgate into the building and you get a RJ45 cable and plug yourself into the network, you will only get access to the internet. If you manage to phish a machine within somebody's the idea is that being inside the building or on the network, just because you're there, location doesn't give you the automatic right to access applications, to be on the network, to scan the network for other machines. Just by being there does not, that location specific. And Netflix actually call it location independent security approach, or LISA. And this basically means that just because you're in the office does not mean that you have a right to be on the network. They're just going to give you internet access by default, so you can access any, you know, external generic apps, but anything that is corporate owned, anything that is controlled by corporate authentication or authorization, has to be done before you can get access to any of the corporate entities.
Mm.
So the next example is in the middle, is about a 2015 hack that was performed at the OPM, or Office of Personnel Management, in the US. And this is basically HR, human resources, for the US government. Now, when they're actually working, I know they had an extra 5 weeks holiday at the beginning of this year. There is obviously a huge amount of people that are covered by the OPM. And it was found that in the 2015 hack, they lost 21 million records. And this isn't like a hack that we see commonly detailed recently, where you get a username and password dump or something like that. This was the 21 million records of the employees. So it included background checks, it included fingerprints of government agents. So this was, not something that was, particularly unique to getting this sensitive data. They obtained it through classic infiltration techniques: compromised user credentials, moving laterally throughout the organization, elevating privileging, and exfiltrating data. Sort of standard hacking 101. And when they were doing a post-breach analysis, they found thousands of other bits of malware, completely unrelated to hack, that have been sitting there for months. So users have been phished, they've been plugged in USB keys, they've done lots of other things. So there's lots of other bits of malware as well. They realized that the normal way that they've been doing business, the way that they're being securing their network, just wasn't fit for purpose anymore. And then if we look at the right, we've got 21st Century Fox, and they had little choice but to move to zero trust, since their digital ecosystem became so complex and fragmented with so many third parties that giving them all network access was just security folly. And Melody Hildebrand, the CISO for 21st Century Fox, describes a movie like Deadpool 2 with over 200 third-party suppliers, from filmmakers, producers, composers, and they don't want to give them access to their network. Simple reason, these guys are never going to have security top of mind and be wondering about whether or not they should click that link. But they need access to the data and the movie and the content and all stages of the production process. And you're not going to be able to go up to Hollywood stars and sort of say, hi, can you put down your iPad and we need to give you a laptop with a VPN on so you can access the script. So that's not going to work. So they need to give people access in a way that the composers and the actors and the producers do their business. They need to give it in that format. So a few years ago, there was a well-published attack called Operation Aurora. Many large companies were attacked, including Akamai and Google. And this led Google on a major review of how resources are accessed and how location should be interpreted. And the net result of this was Beyond Corp, which was an architecture with a mission to have every employee at Google work from an untrusted network without a VPN. So this is two very important changes. They wanted every employee to work from an untrusted network. That means there was no trusted networks that employees could plug into, and there was going to be no VPN. So this meant that there was no tunneling into the network as had been done in the past. And they did this by creating what's called an identity-aware proxy. So all connections to applications and resources were first validated against authentication and authorization by a proxy. So there was no direct network access to the application. Now, as Akamai runs the largest reverse proxy on the planet, this allows us to leverage this architecture and take it to the next level by adding our acceleration and security functionality to the core architecture of the identity-aware proxy. Our Edge platform is therefore perfectly positioned to provide identity-based services to all of your applications. And in addition, we can leverage our security pedigree to help your workforce with their individual device posture to ensure that they are protected against ransomware, phishing, and DNS-based exfiltration, no matter where they are located, and without latency adding hairpinning techniques or tromboning, for example. So at Akamai ourselves, we have fully embraced Zero Trust. This means that every Akamai office is a hotspot. All applications feel like SaaS apps in terms of ease of access and speed. And with MFA push and X509 certs, we are able to do away with the bane of all IT departments, passwords. So we don't use passwords anymore, just using push MFA, X509 certs. So this gives us tremendous ease of access. This is a real boon for end users because they don't have to worry about remembering 300 passwords or even 2 or 3 very, very complex passwords and having to change them every 90 days. We can do away with that altogether.
Sorry, Richard, just to make that clear, do they have a token, or how does that work?
So we use a multi-factor. So we have the X509 certificate on the device. Okay. So we know we know, and then we use a push multi-factor authorization to an application on a mobile phone.
Okay. Thank you.
So why did we move towards Zero Trust as a methodology for users to easily and securely access their applications? There are a couple of interesting points and drivers. For example, we don't trust what we don't know. I know this sounds Rumsfeldian, but we all know that networks evolve and new applications and new networks are organically added to organizations. This may introduce new threats, new weaknesses that are impossible to identify. So we wanted to remove this possibility altogether. And we looked at approaches like NAC, which was, great on paper, the design looked great, but when you actually get down to the implementation, it became very complex and very expensive.
Could you say some more words to this NEC approach? What is the main idea behind it?
Well, this is essentially by understanding your devices and understanding how your devices are going to connect into the organization. So you may want to give people fixed IP addresses. You may want to understand the controls within that machine, whether it's got antivirus on it or whatever. And then you want to sort of say, fine, okay, how is this device going to connect into it, into my organization, and putting in various firewall controls within that. And then you may start to look at things like internally, how we're going to control access between our servers and the applications, so our databases and our web servers, and maybe we want to do firewall controls and that sort of thing, which works very well in the static environment. But as soon as you start getting very mobile, as you start getting organizations, so devices are getting updated frequently by by the host vendor or by security vendors, updating the antivirus. It becomes very difficult to understand the status of those machines, and therefore by understanding the status of machines, whether they are in a secure environment for a secure posture to get access into the estate. So what we want to try and do is put something that's a bit more fluid, that allows us to understand the device posture, but only give them access to applications that they need access to. NAC essentially still gives people access to the network. And we realized that giving people access to the network doesn't necessarily solve the problem. It just pushes people down small channels. But as soon as you get any fluidity within the organization and things need to move, it can break things and things need to be rebuilt. So we wanted to put something in that would grow with us, would allow us to be more flexible, allow us to leverage cloud environments without putting an undue burden on our IT staff.
Okay, thanks.
So this is a quick view of how we did it. So the timeline shows all of the events that allowed us to slowly and silently build our zero trust infrastructure without impacting the business and the users. So along the way, we pushed out client search, as we talked about before, X509 search. And additionally, there is no outbound internet by default. So it's slightly different from the way that Netflix did it. We just sort of took away everything and then added in the applications by default as they were required. We then moved to no passwords with push MFA and then extended this zero trust out to our third parties. And this is where we see a lot of organizations doing their first steps in towards zero trust, is how do they get their third parties access to the applications within their estate? So how do they create secure business-to-business relationships in the same way that Netflix were trying, that 21st Century Fox had to do it with their producers and their composers. They wanted to create an environment where B2B was simple and easy and secure. And this is what we were able to do in that third box there. But we were able to push this out to our third parties and say, fine, the applications you need access to, here's the URL, go off and you can hit that. And they will only get access into that particular application. They would never get access into the network. So we're no longer using a VPN with our third parties for access.
So is it possible, Richard, to implement zero trust in stages? If that's, I could,
absolutely,
start,
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I can start with third parties, for example, and
yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the I think sometimes people think of zero trust as a very it's basically a throwing everything, throwing the baby out with the bathwater sort of thing, where you have to throw everything away and restart. It's not like that at all. The beauty of it is that you can deploy. Commonly, we see drivers from mergers and acquisitions as a great time to utilize zero trust, because you have to suddenly blend together two organizations, and often it's a lot easier just to publish the applications to the secondary business via zero trust, so everybody can carry on without having the burden of having multiple VPNs. I worked for a previous company at one point where I had 3 VPNs on my laptop, all showing the same IP space. So the conflict was always there. You had to log in out of one, log into another, keep dropping in and dropping out. It's not effective. And in an M&A, when you've got lots of end users trying to do their job and trying to carry on working at the speed they were, it's a tremendous blocker to try and do that. But if you can give them access to all the new applications they need to, very simply, very quickly, without having to go through multiple VPNs, it's a great, great boon. And then finally, at the end, Zero Trust, a full identity-aware proxy, was then deployed, publishing hundreds of applications through Zero Trust. Finally, we employed our established acceleration platform with a web application firewall and bot management ability for enhanced protection. So as we move towards the demo, this is how it looks as an architecture, going from left to right. The end user requests are initially checked for malicious activity by our global edge network and WAF. That's the bit where it says ION plus KSD Secure Edge. Then we hit the identity-aware proxy, where the user's credentials are checked via MFA. You don't have to use MFA, but we use it within Akamai. And whether they are authorized to access the application. The applications on the far right, they talk out to the identity-aware proxy, hence no DMZ. And we marry together the request to the application. The response traffic from the application is then delivered over our global edge network that provides acceleration and optimization that is better than VPN alone by an order of magnitude. And this slide shows the adoption of applications within Akamai on Zero Trust. And if you look all the way to the left, you can see how we were very quickly able to deploy well over 100 web apps within a few days with the platform. And this is when you're working with things like web apps, how simply and easily to do it. Many users were even unaware that the web app they were accessing had been migrated to our Zero Trust infrastructure. This is how you can do it silently. You don't need to go through a transformation that's going to affect your or impact your end users. You can do this silently. Such was the ease of the transformation. Now we have over 300 web apps, 100 applications on Zero Trust, accessible globally with no VPN and no direct access into those applications. So there's an excellent white paper that's been written by our CTO that covers a lot of the concepts we've discussed today, and in more detail to show you sort of an achievable roadmap to less risk. And from that, I'd like, Thomas, do you want to come in with our final poll?
Exactly, yeah. We have a third poll, and we would like from the audience whether you already use or have implemented a Zero Trust approach, or do you plan to implement it. You already said there's typical scenarios where Zero Trust is very useful, like if you have a lot of third-party companies to connect with, or if you have a merger and acquisition. Are there other typical companies, typical industries where you would say Zero Trust has more or has the main benefits?
Well, I think the situations where we've seen it being incredibly useful is in organizations that have a lot of B2B. So we've seen a lot of organizations that manage supply chains, so manufacturing has seen a big take-up of this. We've also seen a lot where remote users are very, very common. So, journalistic organizations that need to do secure, file secure copy from all over the world. We've seen it with organizations that just generally want to adopt a more secure posture. They realize that having all of their users on the same network as all of their most secure data and giving people VPN access into layer 3, layer 4 access into the same network that has the crown jewels on it isn't really the best way to go forward. So people want to think, okay, how can I deliver a more secure posture? How can I reduce my risk of phishing? How can I reduce the risk of malware getting onto my own network? How can I reduce the risk of data exfiltration and data breaches, but also provide better access to my end users and a more efficient way of giving third parties access into my organization?
Okay, though there's a lot of arguments for zero trust. Let's have a quick look at the results. We're running a little bit late, so I'd like to give Andy the opportunity to show the demo. We see that most of our audience is still evaluating, 43%, and only 2% have it already implemented. Is it complicated to implement, Richard, or what do you think is what's the reason that there's so few of the audience have already implemented zero trust mechanisms?
I think the evaluating point is very interesting. 43%. I think that if you look at this last year, I think people were still it was still a very nascent concept and design. I think the 2% that have already implemented it, I think is pretty good comparatively. And I think if we ask this question at the end of this year, I think that number will be a lot higher. I think the 43% who are evaluating will certainly be in the top 2 by the end of the year, a substantial amount of that.
So it's just a new approach.
Whether it's only for one application that you need to give access to a third party, or for your entire business, it's not an all or nothing approach. You can deliver zero trust for key applications that need remote access.
Okay, so I'd like to give Andy the chance to show the demo.
Yep, no problem. So what we have here is we have an environment which is running 2 machines side by side. So on the left-hand machine, we have a typical laptop or machine that has a VPN, in this case, connected into a data center. And in the back end is a number of applications. The machine on the right-hand side is accessing exactly the same applications, but running through this zero trust architecture that sits within that. So if I have a look at the kind of the user experience, and I'll just show you kind of what a VPN user might use, which you'd expect to see this. In this case, they can fire up and they can access some contacts apps. They can get through to their expenses. Now, typically with a VPN, what we see is that there might be a couple of different profiles on the VPN, but normally it's not sufficient enough to give everyone the types of access that they need in. So you'd connect to the VPN, which connects you onto the network, and you normally have access to more servers and applications than you normally would need. So in this case through here, they can also get to like an accounts payable app. This is very simplistic. You would normally have a login page here, but it's just for demonstration with this environment. But even if there's a login page, I can still do things like maybe I've stolen some credentials I could use on that page, or I could be trying to do attacks like SQL injection or things along those lines. So with the VPN, we're quite open from that side and get to more things than we should be allowed to get to, which opens up risk within inside the environment. Now, if we have a look at the zero trust side that's running through the platform, it's slightly different over here. One, we can run in what we call a clientless mode, where we don't need to have a client at all on the machine. So to access things like web apps, RDP, SSH connections, you can make it very low access effectively to those types. So in here, if we just open up and try to get to the context, because we're an identity aware proxy, the first thing we do before you even get to anything is we need to identify you. And now we could be using multi-factor authentication, lots of other different forms and functions. But in this case, we're just going to use a password and log in as a sales user. So they log in, and then the experience is the same. They get through to the contacts app. Now we can use single sign-on, so log in once, access to multiple applications, so they can get through to the expenses. But if I try and get through to accounts payable now, they're getting blocked. They're not allowed to get access. So it means that we can very easily kind of manage the applications that they get access to, All the applications are configured in the portal, and then we assign them by user groups, either from Active Directory or LDAP or Azure AD, whatever you might be using. We tie into lots of different identity sources. We could be using third-party identity like Okta Ping. We've got an IDP built into our system as well if you want to consolidate down from a cost perspective. We have a landing page where the user can actually see all the applications they have access to, so it's an easy way for them to see what they easily can find. So it's pretty straightforward. This locks it down a bit easier, and it's very simple for the user to use. They don't have to go really use anything any differently than they've done previously. Now, what I'm going to run here is show you something that a hacker might do. So if they've exposed the machine, typically what a hacker is going to do is they're going to try and find what they can find, one, on that machine itself, but also try and move laterally within the organization. So from this point or this machine, what other applications or servers does it have access to? What can I do? Where can I get to? What can I find? I'm going to run the same thing as if the machine on the Zero Trust machine gets exploited as well somehow. So at this point, we're talking all about access. We're not talking about protecting the machine from getting to phishing links and things like that. We do that by IETP products, which I'll show in a minute. This is purely looking at you rolling that Zero Trust kind of platform when you talk around how the users are accessing applications. The key thing that we want to do is keep users off the network, not even connected. So a VPN, for instance, or if they're internal on the network, that connect to something, they're in your IP space for your data center, your AWS environment, whatever it might be. So we have these two reports that come back to us. On the left-hand side, we have the VPN. And across the VPN, we were able to discover 22 applications. We found some of them were exploitable, and we were able to exfiltrate some data. The applications on both the machines at the back end are exactly the same. They're the same data center. And on the right-hand side, we only found 4, and we can see that we didn't find any exploitable. So on the left-hand side, the Contacts app is vulnerable to a SQL injection. So the same Contacts app on the right-hand side is not vulnerable, and we'll find out why that is in a minute. So one, we can easily restrict down now what they can see, but even if they can see things, there's potentially stuff that they might be able to do with that. So an example would be under the Contacts app has a vulnerability. Typically, internal applications are less tested. They don't go through the same rigor of pen testing, vulnerability scanning, and as often as external facing applications. And in here, if we check out the Contacts app, just in this scenario, just as an example, we have some banking details within here, just to say where my payments goes. And if I come back and if I run and launch the SQL attack, and I come and look at my profile, what the SQL injection has done is it's changed those bank details. So now this person's pay is now going into their hacker's account somewhere. So it's just a very simplistic show, but this is kind of what a hacker might be doing, manipulating data in the organization. If we launch the attack on the Zero Trust side, we will find that the attack gets denied and blocked, and that's why we weren't seeing the application vulnerable. The reason being for this is that Akamai can overlay its web application firewall through this cloud platform. So now all of your internal applications or your web applications can easily take advantage of a web application firewall. This is a big benefit, because quite often internal applications aren't protected by web application firewalls because they're normally maybe positioned in the wrong location. Your web application firewalls are sitting in the DMZ, protecting your external applications, or you're using a cloud WAF that doesn't have the visibility into your internal applications. It's hard to know where to position them. We have our applications all over the place now in a data center, things like AWS, Google Cloud Compute, Azure. By having this platform in this way, you can now just apply WAF to every web application you have, protecting all of them seamlessly and not having to worry about where you deploy things and new applications coming on board, etc.
Okay, and I think we're running a little bit late, so maybe you can wrap up, sure. And we can
absolutely.
address some of the questions? Thank you.
So that pretty much gives a very quick
that was
high-level
impressive.
kind of view.
That was very impressive, I think, to show that. One question is Zero Trust also interesting for smaller companies, or is it only an approach for large, for large companies, or with big employee, with big staffs and a lot of third-party users?
No, I think that Zero Trust is applicable for any organization, because it's about providing secure access to applications. It's about reducing risk, and it's about enabling your users. I mean, you may find you have a very small organization of 50 users, but if you're working on data or whatever, or you're working in a fintech or whatever, and you have assets of hundreds of millions of dollars or pounds or euros, then the security concerns are just as high. If you have hundreds of thousands of bits of data regarding European Union personnel, again, that data is very, very important. So I don't think it matters really upon the size of the organization. I think what we're saying here is that because your users and your data, and it doesn't matter if you have 100 users or 10,000 users, if the users and the data are no longer in the same location as the data, then you can look at Zero Trust as an opportunity. And we have organizations that have taken on the Zero Trust from Akamai, and some organizations have deployed it. Say, for example, an airline may deploy it for their cabin crew, but they may not deploy it for everybody. But their cabin crew, classic example, they need applications to internal applications, but they're never going to be in a situation where they're going to need access, where they're going to be actually in the building very, very, very often. They're always traveling, they're always at different locations. But and airlines can be anyone from having 5,000 cabin crew down to 50 cabin crew if they're a short carrier. So organizations, the size I don't think is important at all. I think it's certainly worth consideration no matter what the size of the organization is. I think the important thing is what is the value of the data you're protecting.
Richard, there was an additional question. Is it affordable for smaller companies? Is there an entry?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd like to address.
I don't think there's no barriers to entry for this. This is a cloud solution, so you don't need to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in hardware for this.
I see. We have one. I would address one last question because we're already almost 10 minutes over time. What is the advantage of this solution compared to a website in some VPN DMC and proxying the minimal amount of apps according to VPN user accounts? Complicated question. I hope you get it, or shall I repeat it?
Yes. One of the benefits is around how the architecture is deployed. So what we do is we have what's called a connector that sits inside either the data center or AWS environment or Azure. That connector makes a connection out to our Akamai platform. The big benefit of this is you do not need any inbound ports open on any firewalls, or inside any organization, you do not need any ports open to access the application. The benefit for this is it makes the applications go what we call dark, and any systems that a user connect to go dark effectively. So there is no point of presence for an attacker to try and hack their way in. So for instance, if you publish a web application that's proxying through, or you're publishing a VPN, there's ports open that a hacker can try and find a vulnerability or find their way through. None of this happens. You have the Akamai platform that sits in front effectively, so you can make your environment hugely more secure. The other area that's a big difference from our kind of platform is the ability to overlay things like performance and the security on top. We have many customers that have global workforces now. They have users roaming globally, and wanting to access applications as fast as possible. And by using our platform and our heritage of performance, we can allow those applications to perform much faster and more reliable, more stable. So there's a number of different areas. Some of the features and functionality goes much deeper, but at a high-level architecture view, that's what makes us different on how we approach this.
Okay, Richard and Andy, many thanks for the presentation and for answering the question. I think we saw that Zero Trust does not only increase security, but also the ease of use for the employees or the third party who needs access to the network, and therefore it's an interesting approach, I think, for every company. Thank you for your attention and for your interest. You can download the presentation and the additional material in the download area. That's it for today. Thanks again, Richard and Andy. And for you, have a good day. Maybe see you another time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.